So this is, it should be our last week of reading on the mode of existence of technical objects. We're just at the end of the conclusion. So we saw last week Simondon's sort of limited engagement with Marxism in relation to technology and the concept of alienation. And Simondon argues that the alienation that is a result of the economic structure of the work relationship is a secondary form of alienation, and the more fundamental form is essential to the work process and not limited to any one economic formation. So the alienation that consists in being disconnected from the technical reality that the worker is working with is a more fundamental alienation than the alienation of not having ownership of the means of production. And I think we had a little bit of, well, we had some discussion of the extent to which this seems plausible. I think there's some problems with Simondon's conception of alienation and how he thinks this alienation can be overcome. And his engagement with Marxism is not very deep. He doesn't, as usual, he doesn't cite any particular text. He just sort of gestures towards Marxism in general. So it's not a very well-developed engagement. And so I think it would be something interesting to look into more, would be a deeper engagement or a development of the relationship between Simondon's work and Marxism or particular Marxist theories. But yeah, that's sort of where we are today. So we're at 257, right at the bottom of the page, I believe. We read the big long paragraph. So I can start reading in just a sec. The relation with the technical object cannot become adequate individual by individual, except in very rare and isolated cases. It can establish itself only to the extent that it will succeed in making this inter-individual collective reality, which we name trans-individual, exist, because it creates a coupling between the inventive and organizational capacities of several subjects. There is a relation of causality and reciprocal conditioning between the existence of clear, non-alienated technical objects used according to a status which does not alienate, and the constitution of such a trans-individual relationship. It might be desirable for industrial life and companies to have technical committees at the level of their employee councils. In order to be efficient and creative, an employee committee should be essentially technical. The organization of channels of information in a company must follow the lines of technical operation and not that of social hierarchy or of purely inter-individual relations, which are inessential with respect to technical operation. The company, being the ensemble of technical objects and men, must be organized on the basis of its essential function, that is, its technical functioning. It is at the level of the technical operation that the whole ensemble of the organization can be thought, not as a configuration of not as a confrontation of classes, i.e. as a pure social ensemble, or as a grouping of individuals each having their psyche, which brings the ensemble down to an interpsychological schema, but as a unit, une unité of technical functioning. The technical world is a world of the collective, which is adequately thought neither on the basis of the brute social fact, nor on the basis of the psyche. To consider technical activity as inessential in its very structure, and to take as essential either the social communities or the interhuman relations arising from technical activity, means not analyzing the nature of this very center of group and of inter-individual relationships, which is technical activity. To keep the notion of work as the center of the social, and the antagonistic permanence of a psychologism of human relations at the level of management and of capital, shows that technical activity is not thought for itself. It is approached only through sociological or economic concepts, studied as an occasion of interpsychological relationships, but not grasped at the level of its real essence. The obscure zone subsists between capital and work, between psychologism and sociologism. Developing between the individual and the social is the trans-individual, which is currently not recognized and is studied through the two extreme aspects of either the work of the laborer or the management of the company. So he's bringing back in this concept of the trans-individual, which we've seen, I think, only in the conclusion of this book. It hasn't been present earlier in the book. So it has to do with a relationship between what is pre-individual within multiple individuals. So it's not a relationship between two or more constituted individuals, but it's the connection between those individuals that arises on the basis of what is pre-individual within each of those individuals, or what has not yet undergone individuation. So it's a form of social relationship which is not between already constituted individuals. And another point worth noting, I think, is when he mentions right near the end of the paragraph, the obscure zone subsists between capital and work, between psychologism and sociologism. So this is a reference again to what he's developed a little bit in this conclusion, and which we'll see more in the individuation book, but the criticism of the hylomorphic schema insofar as it shows a relationship between form and matter. The actual, there's this, what he calls the obscure zone. It's the actual relationship between the form and the matter is left obscure by the schema. We're just given a form and said that it inheres in this matter, but we don't have an understanding of what the actual relationship between them is. And so Simondon here is arguing that the relationship when work is taken not in technical terms, but in sociological or economic terms, that the same type of obscure zone appears within our thinking.
I'm wondering what he would say specifically about bureaucratic technologies in this respect, right? Where, the ways in which filing systems and the circulation of documents and electronic environments, communication environments today, they are all technologies, and yet they seem to be very much organized around this sort of sociologistic thing that he's trying to sort of sidestep. But it's hard to imagine the technology itself as anything but that to a degree.
Yeah, that's an interesting suggestion, because when we think of the types of technologies that he analyzes in this book, they tend to be industrial technology, or instances of industrial technology. So we have motors and turbines, and then electronics, but he doesn't really give any examples of what we could call a bureaucratic technology, and I wonder if that's in part just a product of the time, in the sense that the technology, such as it was at the time, was things like filing systems and paper, and so it's technology in a broad sense, but it's not maybe apparent as technology in the way that an engine or a vacuum tube or whatever is. So I think a broader understanding of technology, or of a technical reality, that it would include something like filing systems and communications networks and so on, might be hard to fit into some of the categories that he develops here. Mm-hmm. But I think maybe we could put something like a filing system at the level of a technical ensemble, and then within that ensemble we would have I guess the technical individual would be something like an individual filing cabinet or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how he would analyze the system as a whole, but it would. I guess the difficulty is that so much of what constitutes a filing system is not technical in the narrow sense. It's something that's different social practices institute a filing system, and the circulation of documents and so on. It's not crystallized into a technical form in the way that some of the other systems that he's discussed, like the electronic or electric power network, for example. As he gave that example as an ensemble. But the bureaucratic circulation of documents is something that is realized by human action in a way that the circulation of electricity is not. So it's a little bit hard to analyze a bureaucratic technology in the same way, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I mean, and everything you just said is very sensible. I wonder whether you might look at something like the library sciences or something like that, like sort of different paradigms of how people think about the flows of documents from, whether it's from the ways that, libraries were organized by Library of Congress designation versus hypertext or something like that. Like those might be moments where you could feasibly say that the technology is somehow concretizing in a way that's more sort of purely functional in the way that Simondon talks about it.
Yeah, that would be an interesting sort of investigation to try to look at the ways that the different systems of circulation and distribution and management of documents throughout different eras, different technical systems. Like obviously there's a big difference between the production of documents in a society where documents have to be written by hand, for example, pre-printing press versus post-printing press. And then again, once you have automatic printing or machine printing, that introduces a new system of production of documents, and each of those systems would have its own, system of distribution of those documents as well, in connection with the way that they're produced. But yeah, that would be a very interesting investigation. But I don't, and it would also be interesting to see to what extent it fits with some of the categories that Simondon has developed, like concretization and the analysis into the three levels of the technical element and the individual and ensemble, to see whether those concepts sort of hold their validity when applied to a different sphere of technical reality in the production and distribution of documents.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good way to put it. That would be really interesting.
And would someone else like to read the next paragraph?
I'll go. The criterion of productivity, as well as the will to characterize technical activity through productivity, cannot lead to a resolution of the problem. Productivity is very abstract with respect to technical activity and does not allow one to enter into this activity in order to see its essence. Several very different technical schemas can lead to identical levels of productivity. A number does not express a schema. The study of productivities and the means to improve them allows the obscurity of the technical zone to persist as completely as the hylomorphic schema does. It can only contribute to the confusing the theoretical problems, even though it plays a practical role in the current structures.
So this is again, or I think we can tie this back to the criticism of a purely management approach to technology, or to technical reality, I should say, to to look at technical objects and ensembles only from the point of view of productivity means that the actual working of those technical technical reality, the working of that technical reality is left obscure in the same way as in the hylomorphic schema. So we just have an input and an output, and the relation between them is just expressed in terms of productivity, in terms of how much output for a given input, or and so the actual operation of the technical reality is left out of the picture. And so, as he says, we can have multiple different technical operations that give the same output in terms of productivity, and we're still left without any real understanding of that technical operation.
I've been thinking, departing from the earlier discussion about filing systems. I'm not sure if I can link this with productivity, but it seems productivity is like an alien criterion when we are talking about the essence of technical activity. But something that is not alien is found in what he calls inventive and organizational capacities of several subjects in the earlier paragraph. So I think the second part, the organizational capacities, is really related to that filing system example. But I'm not sure what notion he has of the link between inventive and organizational. So this brings me to a certain hunch I had about Simondon. I think there is a bridge to be made between his work and design discourse. His work often seems to offer these overtures toward design or different ways of designing technical systems or ensembles. And the values he names, I think, might hold keys to what would his vision of design for filing systems and so on. Efficient and creative, he says. So he has this way of slipping in these values sometimes, which look like he really favors them.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, design is a field that I know very little about, so it's there's not much I can say on that. But I do think you're right that there's a certain normativity of design, or a theory of the norms of design within Simondon. He like we saw this in one of the earlier texts that we read. I forget what the title was, but where he talks about the importance of modularity in design. So the ability to switch out components and replace components without replacing the whole technical object, as a sort of norm of good design. And we've seen also in this book, and I believe also in that same text, where he has this criticism of ornamentation in technical objects, and the way that the technical functioning of the object is obscured by ornamentation or sort of purely stylistic elements that don't contribute to the actual functioning of the object. And yeah, so we can definitely draw some principles of design from his work, and or norms of design. And yeah, I don't know if anyone within the world of design or systems engineering or something like that has ever tried to extract those principles and sort of set them out in a separate way.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I don't know of any work either in that area.
Yeah, it seems like every week we come across some problem or area of investigation that someone could pick up and write a paper on, or a chapter on, or something like that. So yeah, that would be, I'd be happy to read that paper if someone wanted to write it. I think also, if we look at this concept of productivity in relation to the filing systems and bureaucratic operation, this is something that maybe there is more of a connection today than there was at the time he was writing. I'm thinking of some office software allows for management to basically surveil their employees and see, count up how many emails they're sending, or how many keystrokes per hour they're doing, and so on, and sort of apply all these productivity metrics to office type operations, and then the same thing in the academic world, where you have productivity metrics based on publications and the impact factor and so on, and there's increasing use of the concept of productivity in some areas where until fairly recently it had not been applied in the same direct way. So I think this concept of productivity probably has a broader application today than it did at the time Simondon was writing.
I mean, just that the whole conversation to me is provoking that the technical function and productivity are just kind of hand in glove now, right? That this distinction that he would make, if you start to look, it really feels like the ways in which people are becoming inventive are ways of sort of allowing for greater levels of automation and temporal compression and the removal of people from the functioning of the ensembles. It's like we're concretizing people away from the circumstances, and it seems to be happening on the basis of productivity, right? It feels like there's like the two are sort of flush with each other now in this way that it wasn't in the past, but it becomes harder to theorize like how you would the kind of ethos that he's suggesting here as any bit different from just the seeking of better levels of productivity. I mean, I guess I would say that the one thing that he does hold out is that, that the sort of more the sort of cloudier horizon of sort of how we would have a different relationship to technology. I definitely hold that out as something, as a kind of comparative or a kind of a distinction that we'd want to make in terms of like what's wrong with technology. But nevertheless, I do see them as being quite a bit more flush than they might have been in his time.
So the question then would be what sense we can make of technical development or progress in technology separate from the idea of productivity, to the extent that those two ideas are so intertwined today, whether there's still room for a concept of technical development which is not linked directly to productivity.
Yeah, right, and that even doesn't see the kind of more sort of totalizing religiosity of some of the things that he was saying pages past as sort of like that why shouldn't we want that for societies to just be more productive because they are more wealth producing or something like that too, so that even the social dimensions of it, I don't know, it gives way to a kind of totalizing critique of capitalism or something like that, which obviously is not all that helpful. But but you put the position well there, yeah.
Maybe we can extract something like a gesture toward an ethics of nurturing schemas rather than numbers, because it seems number holds like an index to this ascendance of productivity as the norm of technical activity, as external norm. But maybe if we can unpack what he means by a schema in general, maybe we would have a beginning to address this question.
Yeah, that does seem like an interesting place to start for me, for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely more on this notion of schemas in one of his lecture courses on imagination and invention. So he sort of traces the process of invention from there's a sort of the first stage is sort of generating a schema in imagination, and then realizing that there's a sort of process of development through which that schema is realized into an actual technical object. So the schema of operation is sort of the abstract representation of the functioning of the technical object. And we've seen, I think, a little bit in this book about how what he's calling for the science of a general technology or general mechanology, how it would extract these abstract schemas of operation from technical objects, and how this is an essential element to incorporate technical reality into culture, so that these abstract schemas of operation should be part of our sort of general cultural heritage. So there's some scattered references to this notion of the schema, but it's basically the sort of principle of functioning of technical objects, and it's what the act of invention creates is this technical schema, which then becomes realized in a technical object.
And I guess maybe one other strategy would be to be sort of asking, well, what do we mean by productivity, right? Like, and that sort of latent within narratives or discourse around productivity are models of what it means to think, and that you could sort of bring in Simondonian ideas into these accounts of what it means to be a productive thinker, whether it's how philosophy informs machine learning or something like that, or software design or whatever, and the way that we think about software objects, that those are still places where you could maybe bring in a Simondonian understanding of individuation or something like that, to sort of say, well, thinking is actually something different, and so what you say is productive is actually needs to be thought of in more deeply philosophical ways, and then we come up with a sort of more robust formulation of what it means to be a productive society or something by those means.
Yeah, I think the criticism of productivity here that Simondon is setting out doesn't mean, of course, that the notion of productivity is inherently bad or something like that.
Yeah.
It's more that it has a limited use, and then once it goes beyond that sphere of use, it leads to confusion, and so I think it would be possible to try to intervene in something like machine learning or some other sphere, and try to sort of demarcate the boundaries of where the legitimate use of the concept of productivity is, and sort of set out what should be beyond that notion of productivity, or what is not captured by the notion of productivity. So yeah, I think some of these concepts can be applied in that way and taken to intervene in specific disciplines that are tend to be governed by the notion of productivity, and try to separate out what doesn't fit under that notion.
Yeah, that's a more nuanced way of putting it. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we can go on to the next paragraph if someone else would like to read.
I can go. But philosophical thought can play a role in this elucidation of technical reality as an intermediary between the social and the individual psyche in the order of deontological problems. one cannot account for technical activity by classifying it among the practical needs of man, which is to say by allowing to appear as a category of work. Bergson attached the technical activity to homo faber and showed its relation with intelligence. But in this idea of the manipulation of solids as the foundation of technicity, there is a presupposition that prevents the discovery of genuine technicity. Bergson, in fact, starts from the axiological dualism of the closed and the open, of the static and the dynamic, of work and reverie. Work attaches man to the manipulation of solids, and the necessities of action are at the source of an abstracting conceptualization, of the primacy given to the static with respect to the dynamic, to space with respect to time. The activity of work is thus enclosed well within materiality and attached to the body. This is so true that science itself, whose use of technical schemas Bergson sensed, is considered as having a practical and pragmatic function. In this sense, Bergson would be fairly close to the broad trend of scientific nominalism, mixed with a certain pragmatism, which one can sense in Poincaré and then in Leroy, inspired by both Bergson and Poincaré. However, one might wonder whether this pragmatic and nominalist attitude toward the sciences is not based on an inexact analysis of technicity. In order to be able to affirm that the sciences have their sights set on the real, that they want to think, it is not necessary to show that they have no relation with techniques, for it is work that is pragmatic, not technical activity. The gesture of work is directed by its immediate utility. But technical activity reaches the real only at the end of a long process of elaboration. It rests on laws, it is not improvised. For technical solutions to be efficient, they must reach the real according to the laws of the real itself. In this sense, techniques are objective despite all the aspects of utility they may present. Pragmatism is not wrong only because it incorrectly reduces the sciences to techniques, whereas scientific knowledge emerges when techniques fail before the real or fail to harmonize among themselves. Pragmatism is also wrong because it believes that it reduces science to a purely improvised solution by reducing it to technical activity. At root, pragmatism conflates work and technical operation.
So we have here again an engagement with Bergson and to some extent a criticism of him, even though he's one of the key references behind this work and the individuation book as well. So we saw earlier in connection with the notion of intuition that Simondon criticizes or separates himself from Bergson insofar as for Bergson it was intuition is distinguished, is not capable of grasping matter. So it's matter or the extended world or solids, as he says here, would be the sphere of intelligence or the intellect, and intuition would be the mode of knowledge that has to do with the experience of the passing of time, and it would be inextended and separate from the material world. And so Simondon has criticized that conception by arguing that intuition is capable of grasping the material world and its process of genesis. And then so here he's also criticizing the other side, the notion of intelligence or intellect as what grasps the material world or the world of solids. And the criticism is that, so as he says, this pragmatic or pragmatist approach to science or to intelligence that sees the work of science as having to do with human needs and reducing the complexity of the world to fit human needs or something along those lines. That reduction of science rests on an impoverished idea of what technical activity is, because technical activity is not simply a manifestation of human utility or something along those lines, or a response to human needs. It has to, technical activity has to grasp the principles of reality in order to be realized in reality. So in order to create a technical object, you have to organize it in such a way that it functions in accordance with the laws of the real, as he puts it, or we might say the laws of nature. So in this sense, pragmatism, or this pragmatist approach to science that tries to reduce it to technical activity fails, because technical activity itself is not as impoverished as this pragmatist approach suggests it is.
Right. And
I think I would also want to just note here that, again, he's setting out a very strong or a very clear distinction between work and technical activity. So what he takes as being the essential form of technical activity is the invention of a technical or the invention and creation of a technical object, rather than working using a technical object, or labor using a technical object. So it's the act of invention, and the way that act of invention is extended through the process of concretization. That's where the essential technical activity resides, rather than in the use of a technical object in work.
The very start of this paragraph left me just a little bit confused, just because I don't know the term well. But he says that the philosophical thought can play a role in this elucidation of technical reality as an intermediary between the social and the individual psyche in the order of deontological problems. My limited understanding is that it has to do with kind of a duty that's owed to one another. Is that the right use of the term deontological? And if it is, then why characterize what follows on these terms?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I hadn't sort of picked up on that. But yeah, it is a bit of a strange use of the term deontology, because you're right, it does generally have to do with I don't know, the theory of duties or something like that. So what exactly it's doing here? I guess maybe to some extent he's just using it as synonymous with something like ethical problems.
Yeah.
So insofar as the relationship between science and human needs is something that is an ethical problem,
Yeah.
that would be the way that the term is being used here. So that problem would fit into this order of deontological problems. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what he's using that term for.
That's fair. That's a fair explanation, I think, and maybe it's a matter of translation or something. Who knows?
Well, in French, it's the same thing. It's l'ordre des problèmes déontologiques. So it's really just the same thing.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. I don't think it's a translation issue.
All right, then.
But I think we can probably connect this with this idea of deontology that he's put forward in this sort of obscure way. In this text here, we can connect it with the idea of axiology that we saw in one of the other texts that we read before this book. And I think maybe he's used the term in this book as well. I can't remember, but axiology would be the theory of values. And I think this order of deontological problems probably has something to do with the theory of values, or of norms governing technical reality. Given that he's just before this, he's criticized the use of productivity as a norm for technical reality, it makes sense that he would sort of go on to treat the idea of norms for technical reality in a broader sense in the next paragraph. Okay, so we can go on to the next paragraph if someone else would like to read.
I can go. In this sense, the analysis of the mode of existence of technical objects therefore has an epistemological import. A doctrine like Bergson's opposes work to leisure and gives leisure, in the form of reverie, a fundamental epistemological privilege. This opposition returns to the one made by the ancients between servile occupations and the liberal, disinterested occupations, having the value of pure knowledge, while servile occupations only had a value of utility. Pragmatism, by appearing to reverse the hierarchy of values, defines the true by the useful, but it preserves the schema of opposition between the norm of utility and the norm of truth to such an extent that it results in a relativism in the order of knowledge, or at nominalism if this attitude is pushed to its most rigorous and extreme consequences. Science is not more true, but more useful for action than common perception.
Yeah, so I think this paragraph is pretty straightforward. I don't have too much to say about it, but I wonder if we can also tie it back in with in his criticism of the hylomorphic schema, where he argues that it's essentially the schema that belongs to the slave owner who orders, a certain number of bricks to be made out of a batch of clay or something like that. But doesn't actually carry out the operation of forming those bricks himself, and so it leaves that the interaction between the form and the matter as an obscure zone. I think that same. I think we can tie this paragraph back to that conception, insofar as these liberal occupations would be the ones that have this epistemological privilege in a society where there are certain people that have this leisure for contemplation and for these liberal occupations. So it would this separation between the liberal and the servile occupations would reflect the social reality of a society in which some people do have this leisure for contemplation.
Glad you could join us for the last paragraph.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I haven't missed everything.
Yeah, this is the last paragraph of the book. Who wants to have the honor of finishing the book for us? Okay, well, no volunteers, then I will do it. Okay. If, on the contrary, one appeals to the veritable mediation between nature and man, namely to techniques and to the world of technical objects, then one arrives at a theory of knowledge that is no longer nominalist. It is through operation that a becoming aware takes place, but operational is not synonymous with practical. The technical operation is not arbitrary, pliable in every way to the whims of the subject according to the randomness of immediate utility. The technical operation is a pure operation that puts into play the veritable laws of natural reality. The artificial is something natural that has been solicited, not something false or human that has been mistaken for something natural. In antiquity, the opposition between operational knowledge and contemplative knowledge valorized contemplation and the schole that conditioned it. Technics, however, is neither work nor schole. Philosophical thought, insofar as it comes from the tradition and uses schemas coming from the tradition, does not contain any reference to this intermediary reality between work and schole. Axiological thought itself is at two levels and reflects this opposition between work and contemplation. The notions of the theoretical and the practical still refer to this adversative distinction. In this sense, it is permissible to think that the dualism inherent in philosophical thought, a dualism of principles and attitudes because of the double reference to the theoretical and the practical, will be profoundly modified by the introduction of technical activity, considered as an area of reflection within philosophical thought. Bergson has only reversed the correspondences of schole and work by granting work the function of establishing a relationship with solids, hence with what is static, whereas the ancients considered it a fall into the world of generation and corruption, hence of coming into being. Ersan, inversely, attributes to Skole the power to allow a coincidence with duration, with the moving, whereas the ancients assigned to contemplation the role of enabling knowledge of the eternal. But this reversal does not change the condition of duality and the devaluation of the term corresponding to the work of man, whether this term is the moving or the static. It seems that this opposition between action and contemplation, between the immutable and the moving, must cease in the face of the introduction of the technical operation within philosophical thought as area of reflection and even as paradigm. So he's here giving some hints or pointing towards the theory of knowledge, which is developed more in the individuation book, but it's a notion of knowledge that is operatory or operational, but not necessarily practical. So it's operational in the sense that through intuition or this intuitive knowledge, we grasp the coming into being of an essence, a technical essence. We grasp it through this genesis. We carry out a genesis within our thought, and so that's the way of grasping a technical essence. But it's not practical because it's not related to work. It's not a work operation. Oh yeah, thanks 61 for putting Skole into the chat there. Yeah, so that's I think I'm not sure exactly what the reference is to. Well, he just said in antiquity, but I'm not sure which philosophical school he's referring to in particular as using this term.
I could guess it. Aristotle will be one person implied here, maybe.
Yeah, there's definitely in Aristotle. There's definitely this notion that contemplative knowledge is the highest form of knowledge, or the only form of knowledge in the proper sense, and it requires leisure as is sort of the prerequisite for contemplative knowledge. So it's definitely this conception or this opposition is definitely at work in Aristotle's work, but I'm not sure that that's specifically who he had in mind, because of course he doesn't cite a specific author here.
But this paragraph doesn't have the feeling of a closure, not much. As far as closure goes, I find his chapter introductions much more closure-like.
Yeah, I think this last paragraph sort of leads right into the individuation book, because it sort of promises what this way of thinking will do in the future, rather than sort of what has already been done in this book. So I think maybe that's why it has that sense of not really being a closure.
So this is like a really dumb question maybe, but is it the case that he wrote the individuation work after this one?
I'm not really sure about the timeline of when he wrote them, because they were, so at this time in the French university system, you had to present two theses, like there was a major thesis and a minor thesis. And so the individuation book was the major thesis, and this one was the minor thesis. And so they were sort of prepared in the same time period, but I'm not sure if he wrote one before the other or was writing the two at the same time. But the publication of this book came before the publication of the individuation book. So no other comments on this last paragraph?
I'm still wrapping my mind around it. Sorry, I'm not really talkative. I'm very interested though.
No, that's okay. So I thought we could, now that we've gone through the whole book, maybe we can try to reflect on the whole thing and see what what elements stood out for everyone, or is there something that you're sort of taking away from this book as like a key lesson or concept or something like that?
I'm finding myself resorting to a lot of explanatory tools from this text. There was I think like when the essence of technicity part first started, I went through a kind of intense kind of saturation phase where about 50% of my explanations ended up being somehow related to Simondon. But now I'm down. I've got that down to about like 10 to 20%, I think. So I'm more or less kind of scaled back my like extreme excitement and willingness to integrate into my kind of heuristic model, Simondon's, and I've been able to kind of like contextualize it with like the different kind of arguments within like theories of nature. And that's been kind of helpful as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of taking a step towards like the process philosophy and philosophy of action angle. So I'm kind of trying to kind of make more general models in which I can, contextualize what Simondon is saying here, especially in the third part. But one thing that keeps on coming up in when I'm talking to people is, well, the two big distinctions. First, the distinction between speculative knowledge and operational knowledge. I've always had a certain kind of way that I distinguish the practical from the operational in my communication, but it doesn't really have a very high rate of success when I make that distinction with people. And when people hear me do that, they immediately conflate my operational language with practical language. And then there's this whole misunderstanding chain related to philosophy of action, I guess, related to that. So they're kind of playing this kind of shell game with me at that point. They can either they have the option to always provide a skeptical argument to kind of action claims. If I'm not very, very clear about that distinction between operational and practical knowledge. So I think that's one of the things that I've been able to, one of the things that's been helpful about, especially with talking to analytics who are very obsessed with epistemology, having a kind of like theorized meta-epistemic distinction between operational knowing and speculative knowing is just an extremely useful disambiguation tool when it comes to a lot of disputes that people have about issues in which they've gotten caught up in minute parts of definitions and such. Sure. So that's one of the two things. And the other of the two things I think that and this was what originally was very intriguing to me, is the reasons why it's important to separate religious judgment from magical judgment, and the reasons why Simondon does this. And I guess of course I probably, there's definitely the third thing is like the positioning of the aesthetic judgment and all the different maneuvering of the aesthetics which Simondon uses. And a lot of the kind of, I guess, ringing trueness of what's going on in the third part is related to the aesthetic segment, I think. But it's not really clear how it all ties in to the argument in the last instance. And the concept of aesthetics is, of course, extremely fascinating to me as well. But so those 3 points, the aesthetics and the kind of placement of the aesthetics as like a tentative reunification of a primitive magical substrate of some sort, then the kind of differentiation between religious judgment and magical judgment, which is like very much overlooked by people who are very like much in skeptical, socio-political kind of camps, I guess, or sociocultural camps, I should say. And then the speculative knowing versus the operational knowing. That's the other. Those three things alone encompass probably like 95% of what I tell people about Simondon. And usually I barely even mention Simondon. I might throw it in there, but I try not to do too much citation stuff because I had that problem with Hegel, and whenever I mention Hegel, everyone just gets angry. So.
Yeah, that's a good set of takeaways. Yeah, it's interesting that all of the points that you developed, I think, are all from the third part of the book, which I think I've mentioned before, is not really taken up that much in the secondary literature, or at least not as much as the first and second parts, especially the first part. A lot of the secondary literature focuses on the first part and the notion of concretization of the technical lineage and technical evolution. But the part that I have always, well, at least since for years in reading this book, the part that's been interested me the most is the third part, and I think the idea of genesis and of philosophical knowledge as having to do with genesis is something that I'm interested in. I guess there is, for me, I'm interested in the problem of what is the sort of specificity of philosophical knowledge, in distinction from, say, scientific knowledge. So, philosophy is distinct from scientific knowledge, but we have to sort of it's hard to specify what exactly philosophical knowledge consists in if it's not scientific knowledge, unless you want to have recourse to something like sort of like a mystical intuition or something like that. And I think Simondon provides an account of what philosophy is that gives you that explains the specificity of philosophical knowledge without sort of relying on something supernatural or something like that. So I think that is probably the most interesting component of the book for me, is that account of I guess the meta-philosophy of the third part of the book.
That was probably the most stimulating part for me too. I was glad that you wanted to focus so much on it. I find that, so just jumping off from what you said, I sort of only understood Simondon through the secondary literature by and large, and therefore came into things with that focus that you denote, this sort of like a good understanding of concretization and a sort of a desire to sort of apply it practically to kind of different cultural contexts or something like that. Because I work in media studies, and so it feels like a useful and novel concept to approach information technologies, media technologies, and that sort of thing. But then having the third part of the book, having never read the third part of the book, it really did open my eyes in terms of I don't know, being able to think historically, being able to think how knowledge itself is sort of split off according to some of the kind of divergences that are sort of described in the chart that we kept returning to. And so all of that was very much an opening moment for me to sort of figure out how to understand the like in my field, it's just rattled off as the socio-technical, right? When in reality it has this very profound set of bifurcations running through it that are long on historical detail, and that should matter. And so I think what probably for me what I came away with was a much deeper understanding of what one could mean by the socio-technical on the basis of the third part of the book.
Oh, I guess it can be my turn if I take it. I actually I've been Yeah, I've tried. I've been very invested in each part, every part I read, but the part that made the strongest effect on me was the part about the minority and majority distinction as two modes of learning in the second book, in the second part, sorry. And minorities being this more immediate contact of the crafts person, let's say, which does not require the formulation, verbal formulation, and intersubjective or formidable intersubjective and linguistic instruction. It is mediated through the material only, but majority is the realm of intersubjective. So that distinction, I see the reason why he makes that, but I also find a lot of similarities with what he's doing there, between what he's doing there and some more Eurocentric approaches to savage versus more rational ways of thinking. So that's something I'm interested in, this as part of a general discussion of what constitutes propositional and non-propositional ways of knowing perhaps, and thinking. And I'm also interested in something he barely touches on, but he does touch on, I think, the question of language. It's also from the same part, as far as I remember. At some point, he compares how images travel better, as it were, than language in terms of the instruction and technicity. So he has this example of how cathode ray tubes and these radar screens are really good ways of learning about technicity. So this serves as some sort of inroad to a hunch about his general ideas about diagrams. I am interested in finding something like an underpinning schematic thinking in his work, like this, that does not work through language, verbalization. It seems to me the writing of this work, it follows a few non-verbal schemas, and it is basically a translation of a huge architecture that is essentially non-verbal. I don't know, an architecture of concepts and notions and ideas.
That's nicely put.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think in connection with that last point, it's noteworthy that pretty much everyone that reads this book feels the need to either draw that diagram or consult that diagram of the different concepts, especially in the third part of the book. So yeah, I think I think that's a good way of putting it, is that this book is sort of translated from the diagram. The diagram is almost more fundamental than the verbal form of expression that constitutes the book as we have it. Izzy, do you have a takeaway or something that you found interesting or gained from reading this book?
Yes, thank you. I came here really late, and I immediately am very, very impressed by you guys. And well, for me, I came here wanting to learn more about individuation, what that means in Simondon, and of course, it ends up being fascinating. The last part, the trans-individual as a term. And I am also very much thinking a lot about how he uses the term the collective. He mentioned emancipation, but I also find it, that there's a little bit of confusion that I look forward to thinking more about regarding his way of talking about nature, something to do with how I think somewhere a couple of of sessions ago, we talked about how individuation never exhausts pre-individuation, or this relationship between nature and individuation is particularly something that comes back to me a lot in Simondon, because I'm currently working on Whitehead's process and reality, and I would say that the idea of nature as produced in my own work is very important, but here is sort of confusing whether or not how he really defines nature. And of course, this last paragraph throws me way off when he talks about the law of the real, which non-manifest says is also, can be read as nature. So there's a lot of takeaway for me, and I'm super eager to read Individuation, the book. So yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know you worked on Whitehead. I've tried reading Process and Reality a number of times, but I've always sort of given up after a few chapters because it sort of breaks my head. But I should probably push through and read it. I've read some of his other less sort of abstract books. And they're very interesting, so I should probably persist a little bit more.
I have no idea how to read Whitehead. I am barely so many pages in, and I'm super confused, but I'm forced to read it because I am reading Isabel Stinger's Thinking with Whitehead, and halfway through the book, I just thought, I need to actually take a look at Process and Reality, and so I'm not finished with either. But this is incredibly helpful because I think there is a philosopher, I don't know how to say his name, Didier Delbez. Yeah. I think he wrote about Stingers and also Whitehead, and he also emphasized the concept of nature in Whitehead being important and relevant now. Anyway, so this is really, really helpful because I think individuation is basically what Whitehead means in his book Concretions or Creativity. But I think these are very parallel, not necessarily similar things. But now I'm really able to read my Whitehead better too. So.
Wow, I'm jealous. We tried doing Whitehead in the process philosophy group, and my friend was just so negative about it. He was just like, nobody's understanding this, everything's bad, so we canceled Whitehead, and we ended up reading Heraclitus for like weeks after.
I have not met a single person who would be willing to read Whitehead.
Oh, I was bummed that we stopped. I wanted to do it so bad. Like I've been waiting to do it for a while. So I only got like 3 chapters in with a group though.
I'm cheating with Didier Delbez and Isabel Stinger. So really I'm reading Whitehead through them. So, but I have to say, because Whitehead wrote in English rather than French, it helps because Stinger's is not only translated, and my French is terrible, but that the sentence structure is difficult, whereas Whitehead is different. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm cheating off of you. I already downloaded the book that you're talking about, and I'm going to look at it too. And also, I posted it in the Discord if y'all are interested.
Yeah, I mean, if one day anybody wants to read Whitehead, let me know.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think maybe after we finish the Simondon book, the Individuation book, that it will be months from now, but maybe we can take a look at Whitehead after that.
Oh my God, that would be amazing, because ever since I joined this group, my head is clearer. I forgot how, graduate school has been years ago, so I forgot just how great it is to read sentence after sentence, and I hope we never stray from this format, because I don't know what your all's experiences in reading groups are, but it's the ones that we read line by line that really matters to me.
Yeah.
Oh, same. Actually, my favorite ones are like that too.
Yeah, I have to say it's definitely been an extremely disciplined group in that respect, and I'm grateful for it too.
Yeah, I only really picked up this approach through well, in this server, like they were doing the anti-Oedipus reading. I haven't really been following with that recently, but you know, I saw the way they were doing it, and I thought that was like a really good approach to difficult texts. You know, not just sort of glossing over the difficulties, but sort of staying with it and saying like what exactly is going on here, and trying to analyze it. I think it really helps to get a deeper understanding of the text. And I also wanted to thank everybody too for you know, we've been, I think, really consistent. I think we missed like one session over the whole time reading this book. Yeah, we've just been really consistent, and we kept going. I mean, reading a book might not be like a sort of huge accomplishment on its own, but I do think with you know, getting through a whole book, you know, a lot more reading groups start than finish a book, I would say. So I think we can congratulate ourselves a little bit on sticking with it and getting through the whole book.